Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. As you may have heard, the government is looking for a new Parliamentary Budget Officer, and the current interim one says he's interested in the job. But the Finance Committee has decided that they want to interview the shortlist of candidates. And I'm here to say that this is a very bad idea because it's based on a bunch of false premises and will politicize things more than it already is. Now, you may have recalled that the Conservatives have become enamored with the interim PBO because he said a lot of things about the government's current fiscal position, calling it things like stupefying and so on, to which all of his predecessors all came out and pretty much denounced him for doing so. But the Conservatives have since decided that this makes him a truth teller, and therefore they are trying to get him appointed to the position full time. And they also have decided that they want this committee process as part of that and claim that it's just an extension of what's already in the Parliament of Canada Act. But that's not really true. Now, generally what happens with officers of Parliament is that the Prime Minister will select someone and then consult with the opposition leaders around that name and then make the appointment, and the House of Commons will have to vote on it, and then the Senate will also have to vote on it. And the Senate usually goes through a committee of the whole process where the candidate is brought to the floor of the Senate and answers questions for generally about an hour or so. And then they go and take their vote. There generally isn't that kind of process in the House of Commons. Which isn't to say that it's a good or a bad idea, but it's also the fact that the Senate is a far less political chamber and is less likely to do things for partisan political reasons as part of their questioning. Not so in the House of Commons, and particularly in this particular situation where the Conservatives have invested in the interim PBO and want him appointed to the role full-time because of his statements in the past. Of course, those statements have pretty much disqualified him because it is shown that he is more interested in being a media darling and not interested in the actual work of, providing economic forecasts and macroeconomic forecasts. And it goes beyond really what the role of the PBO is supposed to be. It's also the thing where everyone calls him a budget watchdog or a spending watchdog, and he's not a watchdog of any kind at all, if you look up his job description in the Parliament of Canada Act. But again, this goes back to the notion that they want someone who will, say things that will be mean to the government so that they can use that in their attacks and fodder. Because that's essentially what the office of the PBO has become, which is not what it was intended to be and really not what the job is supposed to be doing, which was initially just providing different forecasts to what the government was providing, because the Conservatives back in the Chrétien Harper era were kind of butthurt that all of the economic forecasts always, came in really lowball, and then, whoa, the government had a big surplus, and they got really tired of that, in part because they felt that those surplus should have been turned into tax cuts, but that's also beside the point. They created the PBO to, provide this alternative forecasting, which they felt would be a better way of seeing what the government's true fiscal position is. But then the government went ahead and didn't provide their own forecasts anymore, but just used an aggregate of the 10 leading economists or banks or something to that effect, leading private sector forecasts, I think is what they call it. Suffice to say, and then the PBO started doing all kinds of work in terms of costing private members' bills, which aren't supposed to cost money. That's part of the whole point about why they're private members' bills, and things like that. and my favorite, which is of course costing election platform promises, which winds up being a lot of hokum, because in most cases it was things like the Conservatives would say, we're going to cut so much money, and the PBO would say, well, you say you're going to cut it, I guess I'm just going to have to put that on my letterhead. That didn't serve anyone's purpose other than just to essentially become propaganda for whichever party was putting that forward. It didn't provide meaningful analysis, but this was also something that Trudeau, when he made the position a full officer of Parliament, part of what he was looking for as part of that, which creates more problems overall. Nevertheless, this is kind of the situation we're in. So anyway, back to the point. The reason why the appointment process tends to happen as it does is because there still needs to be a line of accountability in terms of who appoints these officers of Parliament for when things go wrong. This is why the government makes the selection and has the opposition leader sign off on it, but it's still the government's selection that Parliament votes on. Why this is important is because if something goes wrong and that officer of Parliament becomes a problem, then you can hold the government account for making that decision. And this has become a problem in the past. There was once a public sector integrity commissioner, I believe her name was Christiane Ouimet, and she became a problem. Toxic work environment, bullying in the office, so on and so on. And when this came up in the House of Commons, Stockwell Day, who I believe was the government leader at the time, stood up and said, you guys voted on her, it's not on us. And that's not how that's supposed to work. And this is why I really think it's a problem if we have committees starting to interview the shortlists for these positions, especially because you're going to have a bunch of MPs who think that they are American congressmen and that they want to hold a confirmation hearing, which is not how our system works. In fact, it makes things so much worse. It politicizes these offices, which are supposed to be neutral and nonpartisan. And it's all in this in the service of political theater, which, because of course they want more clips for their socials, and they want clips of the interim PBO talking about how he's being honest about the government's fiscal situation, even though he is one of these people who is stuck in the mindset of it's 1995 and will always be 1995, even though it is not 1995. And so this is what they are trying to create. They are trying to create this American-like confirmation hearing, all in the service of gathering clips, because that is the entire modus operandi of Parliament these days, and it's terrible, and it is destroying our parliamentary democracy, but this is what they want more of. And this is why they should not get the opportunity to interview shortlist candidates for officer of Parliament positions. It goes against how the system works, and it works against accountability for the choice that gets made. And that is pretty much the problem here. We don't need this additional process. It's going to simply create more problems than it solves. And in the end, it weakens our democracy even further, and creates an even worse problem for the PBO, which is an office that never should have been created as an independent officer of Parliament, and is rapidly become a very big problem for Parliament as a whole. And it's not good, and this would only make it worse. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.